While everyone remembers the beach assaults and tank battles, America fought another war between picket fences and factory lines. These forgotten masterpieces captured the invisible battlefield where rationing books became weapons and Gold Star mothers paid the ultimate price. Did you know one film used actual war orphans who'd never acted before? Let's dive into the home front classics Hollywood doesn't talk about anymore. Number 12. The Human Comedy, 1943. MGM boss Louis B. Mayer reportedly sobbed uncontrollably after screening this forgotten masterpiece. Based on William Saroyan's novel, it follows teenager Homer McCauley working as a telegraph messenger in small-town California while his brother fights overseas. Every telegram delivery could mean death news to another family. Mickey Rooney earned his only Oscar nomination for dramatic acting here, completely shattering his Andy Hardy persona. The film's power comes from its unflinching portrayal of grief rippling through the home front. One devastating scene shows Homer delivering a death notification to a Mexican immigrant family who barely understand English but instantly recognize the message's meaning. Director Clarence Brown insisted on authenticity, hiring real telegraph operators to train the actors and shooting in actual Western Union offices. The studio initially rejected Saroyan's screenplay as too depressing for wartime audiences, but Mayer personally overrode the decision, calling it the most important film MGM will make during the war. Critics initially dismissed it as overly sentimental, but audiences made it MGM's highest-grossing film of 1943, earning $4.2 million on a $1.1 million budget. One New York critic wrote, "In 90 minutes, the human comedy explains why Americans fight better than any government propaganda film could." Number 11. Since You Went Away, 1944. Producer David O. Selznick mortgaged his house and spent $3.8 million to make this domestic war epic that runs a bladder-testing 172 minutes. After his success with Gone with the Wind, Selznick became obsessed with creating the definitive home front drama, reportedly rewriting the script nightly and driving director John Cromwell to the brink of quitting. Claudette Colbert plays Anne Hilton, whose husband enlists, leaving her to manage their household alone with two daughters. The film covers everything from housing shortages to scrap metal drives with meticulous detail. Selznick insisted on historical accuracy to the point of madness, demanding that all kitchen items shown match actual ration limitations from 1944. The film's most iconic scene shows Colbert in the train station waving goodbye to her soldier husband, knowing he might never return. Filmed in a real Union station with actual departing troops and their families in the background, many extras weren't acting at all, but experiencing the moment for real. Despite its critical acclaim and 9 Oscar nominations, the film became controversial when several Gold Star mothers protested that the sanitized portrayal of war grief was offensive to those who'd actually lost children. Surprisingly progressive for its time, it features Jennifer Jones befriending a wounded veteran with PTSD, challenging audiences to confront war's psychological toll when most films only celebrated physical heroism. Number 10. The Clock, 1945. Before Vincente Minnelli became known for Technicolor musicals, he directed this black-and-white masterpiece about a soldier on 48-hour leave who falls in love with a New York secretary. It's the only dramatic film Judy Garland made at the height of her fame, with not a single song performed. MGM executives initially fought against the casting, claiming audiences wouldn't accept Garland without singing, but Minnelli, who later married her, insisted she had dramatic depths Hollywood had ignored. Shot entirely on MGM backlots because wartime restrictions prevented location filming, the production used forced perspective and brilliant set design to create a convincing New York. The film's heartbreaking central tension comes from the ticking clock element. Robert Walker's soldier has just 2 days before shipping out to likely death overseas. Walker's performance is eerily authentic because he was experiencing a mental breakdown during filming following his divorce from Jennifer Jones. Minnelli later admitted in his autobiography that he exploited Walker's fragile state, using his real emotional turmoil to fuel scenes. Audiences in 1945 watched this in theaters while still not knowing when their own loved ones might return. The film's most devastating sequence shows the couple getting separated in the chaotic Penn Station crowd, a metaphor for war's cruel separations that resonated deeply with audiences who'd experienced exactly that goodbye. Critics praised its unflinching realism about wartime romance, with the New York Times calling it the first film to honestly acknowledge the desperate speed of wartime relationships. Number 9. The Best Years of Our Lives, 1946. William Wyler's post-war masterpiece didn't just win 7 Oscars, it saved lives. After its release, suicide rates among returning veterans actually dropped as the film helped civilians understand what their boys were going through. Producer Samuel Goldwyn, usually obsessed with glamour, insisted on brutal realism, hiring real amputee veteran Harold Russell, who'd never acted before, but won 2 Academy Awards for his performance. The film follows 3 veterans returning home to fictional Boone City, discovering their lives and families transformed. When the script called for a scene showing a veteran having a nightmare, director Wyler interviewed dozens of actual veterans about their recurring dreams, incorporating their exact experiences. Most shocking to 1946 audiences was the film's frank acknowledgement of alcoholism and marital infidelity among returning soldiers, topics Hollywood typically avoided. One sequence showing Dana Andrews' character wandering through a graveyard of discarded warplanes became so iconic that veterans groups organized field trips to aircraft boneyards to help process their feelings. Despite running nearly 3 hours, it became the highest-grossing film since Gone with the Wind, earning $23.7 million on a $2.1 million budget. Adjusted for inflation, it outperformed Saving Private Ryan. Psychologists at VA hospitals actually prescribed viewing the film to families struggling to reintegrate veterans, making it perhaps the only Hollywood drama used as medical therapy. The Military Chaplains Association called it more effective than 1,000 sermons on welcoming the warrior home. Number 8. Mrs. Miniver, 1942. This film literally changed America's willingness to enter the war. Released 6 months after Pearl Harbor, when isolationist sentiment remained strong, it portrayed an English family enduring the Blitz with such emotional power that Winston Churchill claimed it was worth 100 battleships in building American support. FDR was so impressed, he ordered the film's concluding speech broadcast on Voice of America radio. Though set in England, director William Wyler created it specifically to mobilize American sentiment. The production faced constant script changes as actual wartime events unfolded. When filming began, America wasn't even in the war. By release, the country was fully committed. Wyler, a Jewish refugee from Alsace, injected his personal rage against Nazism into every frame. Greer Garson's portrayal of a middle-class housewife facing war with quiet courage earned her an Oscar and became so culturally influential that reports of American women asking hairdressers for the Mrs. Miniver look flooded in from across the country. Most disturbing to 1942 audiences was the scene where Miniver finds a downed German pilot in her garden, humanizing the enemy when most propaganda dehumanized them. The film grossed an astronomical $13 million in 1942 dollars, but its real impact came in social influence. Surveys showed that audiences leaving theaters reported increased willingness to accept rationing and other sacrifices. One theater in Massachusetts recorded that bond sales in the lobby following screenings doubled compared to other films. Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels called it a masterpiece of propaganda that showed what good propaganda really is. Number 7. The More the Merrier, 1943. This screwball comedy about the Washington, D.C. housing shortage seems lightweight until you realize it's actually a daring film about sex during wartime. Director George Stevens, who later filmed the liberation of Dachau concentration camp, created this comedy before witnessing war's horrors firsthand. The contrast is haunting in retrospect. Jean Arthur plays a straight-laced government worker who patriotically subdivides her apartment to help with the capital's housing crisis, ending up with Joel McCrea's military engineer and Charles Coburn's nosy businessman as roommates. What makes this film revolutionary is its frank acknowledgement of sexual frustration on the home front, something 1943 censors typically forbade. The film's most famous scene shows Arthur and McCrea on a front porch at night, engaged in a conversation so erotically charged it somehow slipped past censors, with Arthur later saying she couldn't believe they got away with it. Critics recognized the subversive power, with one calling it the sexiest film ever made without showing anything sexual. The story behind the film is equally fascinating. The housing crisis it depicts was real and severe. Washington's population increased by 40% during the war, with people literally sleeping in shifts in some apartments. The government actively supported the film's production, as it encouraged apartment sharing to alleviate the housing shortage. Despite its seemingly light tone, The More the Merrier won widespread acclaim, earning 6 Oscar nominations and winning Coburn Best Supporting Actor. In a 1975 interview, Stevens admitted the film was his conscious attempt to remind audiences what normal life and romance looked like as the war dragged on. Number 6. Journey for Margaret, 1942. Hollywood usually sanitized war trauma, but this forgotten drama about war orphans hit audiences with a psychological sledgehammer. Released just as American casualties were mounting in the Pacific, it follows an American war correspondent who adopts 2 traumatized British children orphaned during the Blitz. What makes this film extraordinary is that director W.S. Van Dyke cast actual war orphans in several roles, creating scenes of such raw emotional power that preview audiences reportedly left theaters in tears. Margaret O'Brien, only 5 years old, delivers one of cinema's most haunting child performances as a shell-shocked orphan who hasn't spoken since watching her parents die in an air raid. Her breakdown scene was so disturbing that MGM executives demanded cuts, fearing it would traumatize audiences. Van Dyke refused, threatening to quit if they sanitized the reality these children lived. The film became controversial when several child psychologists criticized it for exploiting war trauma for entertainment, while others praised its unflinching portrayal of children's psychological wounds. Robert Young, usually cast in light comedies, fought for the dramatic lead role, later revealing his own childhood abandonment, made the story personally significant. What's fascinating is how the film directly influenced American adoption policies. Following its release, inquiries about adopting European war orphans increased by 35%, according to State Department records. Several welfare organizations reported using clips from the film in training materials for families considering adoption. MGM received over 6,000 letters from viewers asking how they could help real children like Margaret, prompting the studio to establish a war orphan fund. Number 5. Come See the Paradise, 1990. Alan Parker's devastating drama about Japanese-American internment bombed so badly at the box office that 20th Century Fox executives reportedly banned mention of it in company meetings. Why did Americans reject this film? Parker himself bluntly stated, "Americans don't want to confront their concentration camps." The film follows Dennis Quaid as a labor activist who marries Tamlin Tomida's Japanese-American woman, only to see her family forcibly relocated after Pearl Harbor. What makes the film extraordinary is its production design. Parker's team meticulously recreated the Manzanar internment camp based on Dorothea Lange's suppressed government photographs that weren't publicly released until decades after the war. Many Japanese-American survivors who visited the set reportedly broke down in tears at its accuracy. The film faced bizarre resistance from American critics who called it manipulative for showing actual historical events. Roger Ebert wrote one of the few positive reviews, noting, "The film is criticized for using a white protagonist to tell a Japanese-American story, but that's precisely the point. It shows how white Americans were complicit through their silence." Most controversial was the film's depiction of military police shooting internees, which conservative commentators claimed was fabricated despite historical documentation. Several theaters in California and Hawaii reported Japanese-American viewers coming in groups, often including elderly family members who had experienced internment firsthand. The film cost $20 million but earned just $1 million domestically, effectively ending Parker's Hollywood career. He later said, "Americans love war films about fighting Nazis abroad but reject films about our own fascist actions at home." In recent years, it's found new life in history classrooms as one of the few dramatic portrayals of this shameful episode. Number 4. Bad Day at Black Rock, 1955. John Sturgis's neo-Western thriller is disguised as a small-town mystery, but it's actually Hollywood's first direct confrontation with anti-Japanese hate crimes during Tutsuitu. Released when most Americans wanted to forget wartime racial hysteria, it follows one-armed veteran Spencer Tracy arriving in an isolated desert town looking for a Japanese-American farmer who saved his son's life in combat, only to discover the townspeople murdered the man after Pearl Harbor. Shot in just 21 days in the Mojave Desert, the film's production faced opposition from studio executives who feared its controversial subject matter. MGM head Doris Sherry personally protected the project, later writing in his autobiography, "If we can't make films about America's failures, we don't deserve to make films about its successes." Tracy's character was originally written with two arms, but he insisted on playing him as disabled to represent returning veterans. His showdown with town bully Ernest Borgnine used actual martial arts techniques Tracy learned from a Japanese instructor, adding another layer of significance to the film's anti-racist message. What's remarkable is how the film passed Hollywood censorship while directly accusing ordinary Americans of racist murder. Writer Millard Kaufman later revealed they disguised the political content as a thriller to smuggle a message film past MGM's front office. Despite initial mixed reviews, it earned 3 Oscar nominations and has become recognized as a masterpiece of subversive political filmmaking. Most disturbing is that Sturgis based the story on actual incidents. Several Japanese-American families disappeared from rural communities during wartime hysteria, with locals claiming they were relocated when they were actually victims of mob violence that went uninvestigated. Number 3. The Sullivans, 1944. No Hollywood film has ever depicted maternal grief as brutally as this forgotten masterpiece about the 5 Sullivan brothers who died when their ship was torpedoed. The real Sullivan family authorized and consulted on the film, making its emotional impact uniquely authentic. What's extraordinary is how director Lloyd Bacon structures the narrative. The first 90 minutes show the brothers as rambunctious Irish Catholic boys in working-class Waterloo, Iowa, making audiences fall in love with them before the devastating final act. Thomas Mitchell and Selina Royal deliver crushing performances as parents who receive the death notification that all 5 sons were killed in action. The telegram scene was shot in a single take with minimal dialogue, focusing instead on Mitchell's physical collapse under grief's weight. Navy records show that suicide rates among families who'd lost multiple children dropped noticeably in regions where the film played, suggesting its cathartic impact for those experiencing similar losses. The production faced unique challenges as the war was ongoing during filming. The actual Sullivan parents visited the set regularly, with cast members reporting the emotional difficulty of portraying real people who were watching the recreation of their tragedy. Studio executives initially resisted the project, fearing it would damage morale, but naval officials supported it as the story had already become widely known. Most viewers don't realize that following the Sullivans' deaths, the military implemented the sole survivor policy, preventing siblings from serving in combat together. The film's marketing emphasized this policy change, with posters stating their sacrifice was not in vain. In 2018, historians discovered evidence that Darrell F. Zanuck personally covered funeral expenses for the real Sullivan family while developing the film, keeping his contribution anonymous. Number 2. Pride of the Marines, 1945, Warner Brothers. Gambled their reputation on this brutal film about disabled veterans that studio head Jack Warner called the most important movie we've ever made. Based on the true story of Al Schmid, who was blinded in combat at Guadalcanal, it follows his rehabilitation and psychological struggle to accept his disability. What makes this film revolutionary is that it was released while the war was still ongoing, showing Americans the damaged men who were already returning. John Garfield prepared for the role by living with the real Schmid family for weeks, wearing blackout glasses for days at a time, and interviewing dozens of blinded veterans. The film's most shocking scene shows Schmid's uncontrollable rage at his fiancée when she tries to help him eat, depicting PTSD with unflinching realism decades before the condition had a name. Director Delmer Daves insisted on clinical accuracy, bringing actual rehabilitation specialists from veterans' hospitals as consultants. One sequence showing Garfield learning to navigate without sight was filmed in complete darkness with infrared film to give audiences the sensation of blindness. The film became intensely controversial for its third act, which features wounded veterans openly discussing their fears about post-war employment and expressing bitter political opinions. One veteran character delivers a scathing monologue about being forgotten after the parade's end, which conservative commentators condemned as unpatriotic defeatism. Warner Brothers took the extraordinary step of arranging special screenings at military hospitals, with studio records showing they donated 10% of the film's $3.5 million gross to veterans' rehabilitation programs. When some theater owners in the South refused to show the film due to a brief scene showing black and white soldiers in the same hospital ward, Jack Warner personally called them, reportedly saying, "They fight together, they heal together, and by God, they'll be on your screen together." Number 1. Tomorrow is Forever. 1946. Orson Welles secretly directed much of this psychological thriller that Irving Pichel officially helmed, creating perhaps the most disturbing portrait of war's long shadow ever filmed. The plot seems melodramatic. A soldier, presumed dead in WWII, returns 20 years later, unrecognizably disfigured, and discovers his wife has remarried and raised their son, who is now enlisting for WWII. But the execution is psychologically devastating. Claudette Colbert delivers a career-best performance as a woman facing the ghostly return of a past she thought buried. Welles, using experimental makeup techniques developed with Maurice Siderman, transformed himself so completely that Colbert reportedly didn't recognize him between scenes. His character's facial disfigurement and psychological trauma provided American audiences their first unflinching look at war's permanent damage. The film's most controversial element was its portrayal of a European refugee child traumatized by Nazi experiments. Played by 8-year-old Natalie Wood in her breakthrough role, the character refuses to speak after witnessing her parents' murder. Wood's performance is so disturbing that child psychologists were consulted during production. Producer David Lewis later revealed they deliberately avoided explaining the full extent of the child's trauma to Wood, instead directing her emotions by telling her stories about abandoned puppies before emotional scenes. What makes this film extraordinary is how it connects two world wars, showing how unresolved trauma from one conflict feeds directly into the next. Released as veterans were returning home, it forced audiences to confront uncomfortable questions about war's generational impact. Psychiatrist William Menninger, who treated combat trauma during WWII, called it the most accurate portrayal of war's psychological aftermath in American cinema. These overlooked masterpieces tell us more about America's war experience than 1,000 battlefield epics ever could. They show the quiet courage of ordinary people facing extraordinary times, and the psychological scars that lingered long after victory parades ended. Which of these forgotten classics intrigues you most? Have you seen any of them? The real question is, why does America keep celebrating its combat films while forgetting these powerful homefront stories? Maybe we're still not ready to face the uncomfortable truths they reveal about who we really were during our darkest hours.